The scream of the wind tore through the valley like a dying animal, and Katherine Thompson's fingers had gone numb 20 minutes ago as she knelt in the snow beside the struggling heifer, watching the calf's tiny hooves disappear back inside with each failed contraction. Blood mixed with ice on her leather gloves, her breath came in ragged clouds, and she knew with a sinking certainty that she was losing them both if she did not get help soon. But help was 3 miles away in Fort Benton, Montana, and the blizzard had turned the world into a wall of white that swallowed everything beyond her outstretched hand. The year was 1884, and Katherine had been running her father's ranch alone for 8 months since he caught pneumonia and died in his sleep one frigid February night. She was 23 years old, stubborn as the Montana winter was long, and she had sworn over his grave that she would not lose this land to the bank or to her uncle who circled like a vulture, waiting for her to fail. The heifer bellowed again, a sound of pure agony that cut through the wind, and Katherine wiped the snow from her face with her forearm, trying to see through the white curtain that surrounded them. She had found the heifer an hour ago, separated from the rest of the herd, lying on her side in the shallow ravine where she had sought shelter from the storm. The calf was breech, coming wrong, and Katherine had been trying ever since to turn it, to guide those small hooves into the right position. But her hands were too cold. Her strength was fading, and the heifer was weakening with every passing minute. The temperature had dropped 20 degrees since morning, and the snow was coming down so thick that Katherine could barely see the outline of her own barn, which she knew was less than half a mile to the east, though it might as well have been in another territory for all the good it did her now. She pushed her hand inside again, feeling for the calf's head, trying to guide it around, but the heifer lurched and Katherine nearly lost her balance in the snow. Her dark hair, which she had pinned up that morning, had come loose and whipped around her face in wet strands. Her coat, which had belonged to her father and was 2 sizes too large, was soaked through, and she could feel the cold seeping into her bones. She thought about giving up, about leaving the heifer here and trying to make it back to the house before she froze to death herself, but the thought lasted only a second before she dismissed it. She had never walked away from a fight in her life, and she was not about to start now. The sound of hoofbeats came through the wind like thunder, and Katherine looked up, squinting against the snow. A dark shape materialized from the white, a horse and rider moving with purpose through the storm. And for one wild moment, Katherine thought she was hallucinating, that the cold had finally addled her brain. But then the horse was there, a big bay gelding steaming in the frigid air, and the rider was swinging down from the saddle, a tall man in a dark coat with a scarf wrapped around his face. "You need help," he said, and it was not a question. His voice was deep, muffled by the scarf, and he was already kneeling beside her in the snow, pulling off his gloves. His hands were large, scarred from work, and he did not wait for her permission before he was examining the heifer, running his hands over her distended belly, checking the position of the calf. "She has been laboring for over an hour," Katherine said, having to shout to be heard over the wind. "The calf is breech. I cannot turn it." The man nodded, his eyes meeting hers for a brief moment. They were gray, the color of the storm clouds overhead, and there was something in them that made Katherine trust him instantly, though she could not have said why. He unwrapped the scarf from his face, revealing a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of dark stubble, and Katherine found herself staring before she caught herself and looked away. "My name is Owen Xavier," he said, rolling up his sleeves despite the cold. "I was trying to get back to my camp when I heard you. Hold her head, keep her calm." Katherine moved to the heifer's head, placing her hands on the animal's neck, murmuring soft words that were carried away by the wind. Owen worked quickly, his movements sure and confident, and Katherine watched as he maneuvered his arm inside, his face a mask of concentration. The heifer bellowed and tried to rise, but Katherine held her down, adding her weight to keep the animal still. "Easy, girl," Owen said, his voice low and soothing despite the urgency of the situation. "Almost there. I have got the head, just need to get the legs positioned." Minutes stretched like hours. Katherine's teeth were chattering so hard she thought they might break, and her whole body was shaking with cold and exhaustion. But Owen did not falter, did not give up, and finally, with a rush of fluid and blood, the calf slid free onto the snow. It lay motionless for a terrible moment, and Katherine's heart sank. But then Owen was clearing its nose and mouth, rubbing it vigorously with handfuls of snow. And suddenly the calf gasped and coughed and drew its first shuddering breath. The heifer, exhausted but alive, turned her head to sniff at her baby, and Katherine felt tears sting her eyes, though she blinked them back quickly. She would not cry in front of this stranger, no matter how grateful she was. Owen sat back on his heels, his chest heaving, his hands and arms covered in blood and birth fluids, and he looked at Katherine with those storm-gray eyes and smiled, a real smile that transformed his entire face. "She will be all right," he said. "They both will if we can get them to shelter soon." Katherine nodded, not trusting her voice, and pushed herself to her feet. Her legs nearly gave out beneath her, and Owen was there instantly, his hand on her elbow, steadying her. Even through the layers of clothing, she could feel the warmth of him, the solid strength, and something shifted in her chest, something she did not have time to examine. "My barn is east," she said, pointing, though the gesture was useless in the white chaos around them. "Less than half a mile. If you help me get them there, I can offer you a hot meal and a place to wait out the storm." Owen looked at her for a long moment, as if weighing his options, and then he nodded. "Let me get my horse." Together, they managed to get the heifer to her feet, though the animal was weak and stumbling. The calf was too young to walk, so Owen lifted it in his arms, cradling it against his chest, and Katherine took the heifer's rope, leading her slowly through the snow. Owen's bay gelding followed behind, well-trained and unbothered by the calf's weight across his master's shoulders. The journey to the barn was a nightmare of white and cold and wind, but Katherine kept her eyes fixed on the vague dark shape that grew slowly larger. And finally, they were stumbling through the barn door into the relative warmth and quiet of the interior. Katherine's horses nickered from their stalls, and the smell of hay and animals was so familiar, so comforting, that Katherine wanted to sink down right there and never move again. But there was work to be done, so she led the heifer into an empty stall, spreading fresh straw while Owen laid the calf down gently beside its mother. The heifer immediately began licking the calf clean, and Katherine allowed herself a moment to watch, to feel the deep satisfaction of a life saved before she turned to Owen. "Thank you," she said, and her voice came out hoarse, raw from shouting over the wind. "I would have lost them both without you." Owen was looking at her with an expression she could not quite read, and he opened his mouth to respond, but then Katherine's knees buckled and the world tilted sideways. She felt his hands catch her before she hit the ground, felt herself being lifted as if she weighed nothing. And then there was only darkness and the distant sound of his voice calling her name, though she had no memory of telling him what it was. When Katherine woke, she was in her own bed in the small ranch house, covered with every quilt she owned, and the smell of coffee was drifting up from the kitchen below. For a moment, she could not remember how she had gotten there, and then the memories came flooding back in a rush. The blizzard. The calf. The stranger with the gray eyes who had appeared like an answer to a prayer she had not known she was praying. She pushed herself up, ignoring the way her muscles screamed in protest, and looked around the room. Her wet clothes were gone, replaced by her warmest flannel nightgown, and her face burned as she realized that Owen must have undressed her, must have seen her in a state of undress that no man outside of a husband should see. But then she reminded herself that he had likely saved her life, that she had been on the verge of freezing to death, and modesty seemed a small price to pay for survival. The window showed a world still white with snow, though the wind had died down and the worst of the storm seemed to have passed. Katherine guessed it was late afternoon, which meant she had been unconscious for several hours. She swung her legs out of bed, testing her strength, and was relieved to find that while she was sore and exhausted, she could stand. She pulled on her wool robe and made her way downstairs, following the smell of coffee and something else, something savory that made her stomach growl with sudden hunger. Owen was in her kitchen, standing at her stove, cooking eggs and bacon in her cast-iron skillet. He had removed his coat and was working in his shirt sleeves, his dark hair damp and curling slightly at the nape of his neck. He looked completely at ease, as if he cooked in strange women's kitchens every day, and Katherine found herself staring at the breadth of his shoulders, the way his hands moved with casual competence as he flipped the eggs. "You should be in bed," he said without turning around, and Katherine wondered how he had known she was there. "I have been in bed long enough," she replied, moving to the table and sinking into one of the chairs. Her father's chair, though she tried not to think about that. "How long was I unconscious?" "A few hours. You were hypothermic, exhausted. Your body shut down to protect itself." He turned then, sliding a plate of food in front of her, and his eyes swept over her face with a concern that made her heart skip in a way that had nothing to do with her recent brush with death. "You need to eat, build your strength back up." Katherine wanted to argue, to tell him that she was fine, that she had survived worse than a little cold and exhaustion, but the smell of the food made her mouth water, and she realized she could not remember the last time she had eaten. So she picked up her fork and took a bite, and the simple pleasure of hot food after hours of cold and fear was almost enough to make her cry again. Owen poured 2 cups of coffee and sat down across from her, his own plate untouched as he watched her eat. It should have been uncomfortable, this stranger in her home, sitting at her table, but instead it felt oddly right, as if he belonged there, and that thought was more disturbing than anything else that had happened that day. "Who are you?" she asked finally, when she had eaten enough to take the edge off her hunger. "Where did you come from?" Owen took a sip of his coffee, his eyes distant. "I am a ranch hand, or I was. Spent the last 5 years working spreads from Texas to Wyoming. Was on my way to a job in Helena when the storm hit. Figured I would hole up somewhere until it passed." "You are a long way from Helena," Katherine observed. "Got turned around in the storm," Owen admitted with a slight smile. "Ended up here by accident. Or providence, depending on how you look at it." Katherine thought about the timing, about how if he had been even 10 minutes later she might have frozen to death in that ravine, and she had to acknowledge that providence seemed as good an explanation as any. She studied him over the rim of her coffee cup, taking in the weathered lines of his face, the scars on his hands, the way he held himself with the easy confidence of a man who had spent his life working with animals and the land. "How old are you?" she asked, and then flushed because it seemed like an impertinent question, but Owen did not seem offended. 27, he said. "Old enough to know better, young enough to keep making the same mistakes. And you?" 23, Katherine replied. "Old enough to run a ranch, young enough to nearly get myself killed trying." Owen's expression grew serious. "You should not have been out there alone. Where is your husband, your father?" "Dead," Katherine said flatly, and she saw the sympathy flash across his face. "My father died 8 months ago. There is no husband. There is just me and 300 acres and a mortgage the bank is threatening to call in if I miss another payment." She had not meant to tell him all that, had not meant to reveal the precarious nature of her situation to this stranger, but something about him invited confidences, made her want to unburden herself in a way she had not wanted to with anyone since her father died. Owen was quiet for a long moment, his coffee cup cradled between his palms, and when he spoke his voice was gentle. "That is a heavy load for one person to carry." "I can carry it," Katherine said, hearing the defensiveness in her own voice. "I have been carrying it for 8 months. I do not need anyone's pity." "I am not offering pity," Owen said, meeting her eyes. "I am offering respect. It takes a strong person to do what you are doing, but strength is not the same as invincibility. Everyone needs help sometimes." Katherine opened her mouth to argue, to tell him that she was fine, that she had everything under control, but the words would not come. Because the truth was that she was not fine, that she had been drowning slowly for months, barely keeping her head above water, and she was so tired of pretending otherwise. So instead she looked away, blinking hard, and changed the subject. "The heifer and the calf, they are all right. I checked on them an hour ago, both doing well. The calf is nursing, which is a good sign." Katherine nodded, relieved. Every animal mattered on a ranch this size. Every loss was felt keenly in the ledger book she kept in her father's old desk. She could not afford to lose cattle, could not afford to lose anything, which was why she had been out in that storm in the first place, risking her own life for the sake of a cow and an unborn calf. "I owe you a debt," she said quietly. "I do not know how I can repay you, but I will find a way." Owen shook his head. "You do not owe me anything. I did what anyone would have done." "But you are not anyone," Katherine said, and the words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning neither of them was quite ready to examine. The storm lasted another 2 days, and Owen stayed. Katherine told herself it was because the roads were impassable, because it would have been suicide to try to travel in those conditions. But the truth was that she did not want him to leave. He made himself useful in 100 small ways, fixing the loose board on the barn door that she had been meaning to get to for weeks, repairing the broken hinge on one of the stalls, chopping enough firewood to see her through another week. He moved through her ranch with the ease of long practice, and Katherine found herself watching him when she thought he was not looking, noticing the way he spoke softly to the horses, the gentleness in his hands despite their size and strength. They fell into an easy rhythm, working side by side during the day, sharing meals in the evening, sitting by the fire and talking late into the night. Owen told her about his childhood in Texas, about the ranch where he had grown up, and the cattle drive where his father had died when Owen was 14. He told her about the years he had spent drifting from job to job, never staying in one place long enough to put down roots, always moving on when the restlessness became too much to bear. Katherine told him about her own childhood here on this ranch, about her mother who had died giving birth to a baby brother who had not survived the night, about her father who had taught her everything he knew about running a ranch because he had no son and Katherine had wanted to learn. She told him about the loneliness of the past 8 months, the crushing weight of responsibility, the fear that she would fail and lose everything her father had worked so hard to build. "Why do you do it?" Owen asked on the second night when they were sitting by the fire with the wind howling outside like a living thing. "Why not sell the ranch, move to town, have an easier life?" Katherine looked at him as if he had suggested she cut off her own arm. This land is everything. It is all I have of my father, all I have of my family. How can I walk away from that, even if it kills you?" Owen asked quietly, and Katherine heard the genuine concern in his voice. "Even then," she said, and she meant it. Owen was silent for a long moment, his eyes reflecting the firelight, and then he said, "I understand. I have spent 5 years running from the very thing you are holding on to so tight. The thing is, Katherine, sometimes running is easier than staying. It takes a special kind of courage to stand your ground." It was the first time he had used her given name, and Katherine felt something warm unfurl in her chest at the sound of it in his voice. She wanted to ask him why he was running, what he was afraid of, but she sensed that he was not ready to answer those questions, so instead she asked, "Will you go to Helena? When the storm breaks?" Owen looked away into the fire, and Katherine thought he was not going to answer. But then he said, "I do not know. That job will be long gone by now. Maybe it is time I stopped running." "And did what?" Katherine asked, hardly daring to breathe. "Stayed," Owen said, and he turned to look at her then, and the expression in his eyes made her heart pound so hard she was certain he could hear it. "If I was wanted." Katherine knew what he was asking, knew that this was the moment where everything could change, and she was terrified and exhilarated in equal measure. She had known this man for only 2 days, and yet she felt as if she had known him all her life, as if he was the missing piece she had not known she was looking for. But she was also practical, raised to be careful with her trust and her heart, and so she said carefully, "I cannot pay you much. The ranch is barely breaking even as it is." "I am not asking for money," Owen said, and he leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his eyes never leaving hers. "I am asking for a chance to prove that I can stay, that I can be the kind of man who does not run when things get hard. And if I am being completely honest, I am asking for a chance with you, Katherine, because I have not been able to stop thinking about you since the moment I saw you in that storm, fighting for that calf like your life depended on it." Katherine's breath caught in her throat. No man had ever spoken to her like that, with such raw honesty, and she did not know how to respond. She wanted to say yes, wanted to throw caution to the wind and take the chance he was offering, but there was too much at stake, too much that could go wrong. "I need time," she said finally. "I need to be sure." Owen nodded, and if he was disappointed, he did not show it. "Time I can give you, but Katherine, I want you to know that I am already sure. I was sure the moment I pulled that calf free and looked up and saw you smiling. I am not a man who says things I do not mean, and I mean this. I want to stay. I want to help you save this ranch, and I want to see where this thing between us goes." Katherine looked at him, at the sincerity in his eyes, the hope and fear written plainly on his face, and she felt something inside her give way, some wall she had built around her heart crumbling to dust. She reached out slowly and took his hand, and his fingers closed around hers with a gentleness that made her eyes sting with tears. "Stay," she said simply. "Stay and we will see what happens." Owen's smile was like the sun coming out from behind clouds, and he brought her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. And Katherine felt the warmth of that kiss all the way down to her toes. They sat like that for a long time, hands clasped, not speaking, just being together while the storm raged outside and the fire crackled in the hearth. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the sky a brilliant blue that hurt to look at after days of gray and white. The snow had stopped, and while the drifts were still deep, the world felt renewed, cleansed by the storm. Katherine woke early, as she always did, and found Owen already up and dressed, standing at the window looking out at the white landscape. "It is beautiful," he said when he heard her come down the stairs. "It is dangerous," Katherine corrected, but she moved to stand beside him and allowed herself a moment to appreciate the stark beauty of the snow-covered valley. "We need to check on the rest of the herd, make sure none of them are stranded or injured." "I figured as much," Owen said. "I saddled the horses while you were sleeping. We can head out as soon as you are ready." Katherine looked at him, at the way he had anticipated her needs, the way he was already making himself indispensable, and she felt a flutter of something that might have been fear or might have been hope. She could not tell which, and perhaps it did not matter. What mattered was that he was here, and he was willing to help, and for the first time in 8 months Katherine did not feel like she was facing the world alone. They rode out together into the white wilderness, their horses breaking trail through the deep snow. It was slow going, exhausting work, but Owen never complained, never suggested they turn back. They found the rest of the herd huddled in a stand of trees on the far side of the property, cold and hungry, but mostly unharmed. 3 calves had been born during the storm, and 2 had survived, which Katherine counted as a victory given the circumstances. They spent the day breaking ice in the water troughs, distributing hay, checking each animal for signs of frostbite or injury. It was hard, physical work, the kind that left Katherine's muscles aching and her hands raw despite her gloves. But Owen worked beside her every step of the way, his strength making tasks that would have taken her hours alone pass in half the time. They did not talk much, conserving their energy for the work, but Katherine was acutely aware of him, of the way they moved together with an ease that spoke of long partnership rather than 2 days' acquaintance. When they finally returned to the ranch house as the sun was setting, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold, Katherine was so tired she could barely dismount. Owen was there to catch her, his hands on her waist, steadying her, and for a moment they stood there in the barn, very close, their breath mingling in clouds in the cold air. Katherine looked up at him, at the way the fading light caught in his gray eyes, and she thought that she could kiss him right now, that he would let her, would welcome it even. But she was not quite ready for that step, so instead she stepped back, putting space between them, and said, "Thank you. For today, for everything." "You do not need to keep thanking me," Owen said, but his voice was rough in a way that made Katherine think maybe he had wanted that kiss too. "We are partners now. Partners help each other. Partners." The word settled over Katherine like a warm blanket, and she realized that was exactly what they were becoming. Not employer and employee, not benefactor and recipient, but partners in the truest sense of the word. It was a heady feeling, both frightening and wonderful, and Katherine went to bed that night with a smile on her face for the first time in longer than she could remember. The days turned into weeks, and winter slowly began to loosen its grip on Montana. Owen stayed, and Katherine found herself falling into a life that felt fuller, richer, more complete than anything she had known before. They worked together during the day, and in the evenings they sat by the fire and talked or read or simply enjoyed the comfortable silence that had developed between them. Owen was teaching her to play chess using a set he had carved himself from scraps of wood, and Katherine was teaching him to read better, patiently working through the words he stumbled over, never making him feel less than for his limited education. She learned that he took his coffee black, that he sang to the horses when he thought no one was listening, that he had a scar on his left shoulder from a bullet he had taken during a stampede in Texas. She learned that he was kind and patient and hardworking, that he never shirked a task no matter how unpleasant, that he had a quiet sense of humor that caught her by surprise and made her laugh in a way she had not laughed in years. And she learned that she was falling in love with him, slowly and surely, like snow accumulating on a roof, barely noticeable until suddenly the weight of it was undeniable. They were careful not to touch more than was necessary, careful to maintain a respectful distance. But Katherine felt the tension growing between them like a living thing. She caught him watching her sometimes with an expression that made her insides flutter, and she knew that he caught her watching him just as often. It was a sweet torture, this wanting and waiting, and Katherine did not know how much longer she could bear it. The answer came on a cold February morning, exactly 1 year to the day after her father had died. Katherine had ridden out alone to visit his grave on the hill overlooking the ranch, something she did every month without fail. She stood there in the snow, looking down at the simple wooden cross she had carved with her own hands, and she talked to him the way she always did, telling him about the ranch, about the cattle, about Owen. "I think I love him, Papa," she said quietly, the words carried away by the wind. "I think I want to marry him if he will have me. I hope that would make you happy. I hope you would approve." "I think he would," said a voice behind her, and Katherine spun around to find Owen standing there, his hat in his hands, his expression solemn. "From everything you have told me about him, I think he would want you to be happy. And Katherine, I want you to know that making you happy is all I want to do for the rest of my life, if you will let me." Katherine's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. "How long have you been standing there?" "Long enough," Owen said, and he took a step closer. "Long enough to hear you say you love me, and I need to tell you, Katherine, that I love you too. I have loved you since that first day in the blizzard, and I will love you until the day I die. So I am asking you, here in front of your father, will you marry me?" He did not have a ring, did not drop to one knee, but Katherine thought it was the most perfect proposal she could have imagined. Here on the hill where her father rested, with the ranch spread out below them like a promise, with the man she loved standing before her with his heart in his eyes. She did not hesitate, did not second-guess, just launched herself at him and said, "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." Owen caught her and lifted her off her feet, spinning her around, and then he was kissing her, and she was kissing him back, and it was everything she had dreamed it would be and more. His lips were cold from the wind but warm beneath, and he kissed her with a passion that spoke of weeks of restraint finally breaking, and Katherine poured everything she felt into that kiss, all the love and hope and joy that had been building inside her. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Owen rested his forehead against hers and said, "I will spend every day of my life making sure you never regret this." "I could never regret this," Katherine said, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Fort Benton, with half the town in attendance because Katherine Thompson was well known and well liked, and people were curious about the mysterious cowboy who had appeared out of a blizzard and stolen her heart. The ceremony was simple, the preacher's words familiar and comforting, and when Owen slipped the ring onto Katherine's finger, a simple gold band he had bought with money he had saved from his last job, Katherine thought her heart might overflow with happiness. They held the reception in the barn, which had been cleaned and decorated with wildflowers that had been carefully preserved from the previous summer. There was music and dancing and more food than Katherine had seen in one place since before her father died. Owen danced with her under the lantern light, his arms strong and sure around her, and Katherine thought she had never been so happy in all her life. That night, in the bedroom that had been hers alone for so long, Owen carried her over the threshold with a tenderness that made tears spring to her eyes. He set her down gently and cupped her face in his hands, looking at her with such love that Katherine felt it like a physical warmth. "I am going to love you so well, Katherine Xavier," he said, using her new name for the first time, and Katherine felt a thrill run through her at the sound of it. "I know you will," she said, and then there were no more words, just the two of them coming together as husband and wife, sealing the promises they had made with their bodies as well as their words. The months that followed were the happiest of Katherine's life. With Owen working beside her, the ranch began to thrive in a way it had not even when her father was alive. They worked from dawn to dusk, but the work felt lighter somehow, less burdensome, because it was shared. Owen had a gift with the cattle, a patience and understanding that Katherine had rarely seen, and under his care the herd grew healthier and stronger. They expanded the grazing land, repaired fences that had been neglected, built a new chicken coop and acquired a small flock of hens. Katherine started selling eggs in town, a small income but every bit helped. Owen broke and trained 3 wild horses he found on the property, selling 2 and keeping the third, a spirited mare that Katherine fell in love with on sight. But it was not all work. Owen made sure they took time for each other, for long rides through the valley in the evening, for quiet mornings spent in bed when the weather was too bad to work outside, for stolen kisses in the barn and laughter over dinner. He courted her as if they were not already married, bringing her wildflowers he found on the range, carving her small gifts from wood during the long winter nights, telling her he loved her a dozen times a day until Katherine began to believe it deep in her bones. Summer came, hot and bright, and with it came the news that Katherine was pregnant. She told Owen one evening after supper, watching his face carefully, unsure how he would react. They had not discussed children, had not planned for them, and Katherine did not know if he wanted to be a father. But Owen's reaction left no doubt. His face lit up like the sun, and he let out a whoop of joy that startled the horses in the barn. He picked Katherine up and spun her around despite her protests, and then he set her down carefully as if she were made of glass, his hands gentle on her still flat belly. "A baby," he said, his voice full of wonder. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Katherine asked, needing to hear him say it. "Happy," Owen repeated, and he laughed, a sound of pure joy. "Katherine, I am beyond happy. I am ecstatic. I am terrified. I am every emotion at once. We are going to be parents." Katherine felt tears slip down her cheeks, and Owen wiped them away with his thumbs, kissing her forehead, her nose, her lips. "I love you," he said. "I love you, and I love our baby, and I am going to be the best father I can be." "I know you will," Katherine said, and she believed it. The pregnancy was not easy. Katherine was sick for the first 3 months, unable to keep down more than toast and weak tea, and Owen fussed over her like a mother hen, insisting she rest when she wanted to work, bringing her cool cloths when she was feverish, holding her hair back when she was sick. Katherine was frustrated by her body's betrayal, by the weakness she had never known before, but Owen was endlessly patient, endlessly kind, and slowly she learned to accept his care. As her belly grew, so did the excitement in the valley. Their neighbors, ranchers Katherine had known all her life, came by with gifts for the baby, hand-knitted blankets and tiny clothes and advice that Katherine listened to with good humor, even when it contradicted itself. Owen built a cradle from cedar wood, sanding it until it was smooth as silk, and Katherine sewed quilts and nightgowns from fabric she bought on a rare trip to town. Winter came again, and with it the memories of that first blizzard, of the day Owen had appeared in her life and changed everything. They celebrated their first anniversary quietly, just the two of them, and a special dinner Katherine had spent all day preparing. Owen gave her a necklace he had made himself, a delicate chain with a pendant carved in the shape of a snowflake, and Katherine cried and kissed him, and told him she loved him more than she had thought it possible to love another person. The baby came in early March, during a late-season snowstorm that seemed like an echo of the blizzard that had brought Owen into her life. Katherine labored for 12 hours, with Owen beside her the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, murmuring words of encouragement. The local midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Henley, supervised the birth, and when the baby finally arrived, squalling and red-faced and perfect, she placed him in Katherine's arms with a smile. "A boy," she said. "A healthy, strong boy." Katherine looked down at her son, at his tiny fists and dark hair and eyes that would probably be gray like his father's, and she felt a love so fierce it took her breath away. Owen was beside her, his arm around her shoulders, his eyes wet with tears, and when he reached out to touch the baby's cheek with one gentle finger, Katherine fell in love with him all over again. "What should we name him?" she asked softly. Owen was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "What about Thomas, after your father?" Katherine looked at him, this man who had known her father only through her stories, who understood how much that name would mean to her, and she could not speak past the lump in her throat. So she just nodded, and Owen kissed her temple and whispered, "Thomas Xavier. Welcome to the world, son." The days that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and endless feedings and the steep learning curve of new parenthood. But Owen was a natural father, patient and gentle with their son, rising in the middle of the night to change diapers and bring the baby to Katherine for nursing, singing the same songs to Thomas that he sang to the horses. Katherine watched him sometimes, cradling their son against his chest as he walked the floor at 3 in the morning, and she thought about how far they had come, from strangers in a blizzard to a family. The ranch continued to prosper. With the money from the cattle sale that spring, they were able to pay off the mortgage, and Katherine felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she had been carrying for 2 years. The land was theirs, truly theirs, and no one could take it away. They celebrated by planting an apple orchard on the south side of the property, trees that would take years to bear fruit, but that represented a future, a legacy they were building for their son. Thomas grew from a baby into a toddler, strong and curious and fearless, with his father's gray eyes and his mother's stubborn streak. He took his first steps in the barn, walking from Katherine to Owen and back again, and they both cheered as if he had accomplished something miraculous. He said his first word at 10 months, and it was "Papa," and Owen carried him around on his shoulders for the rest of the day, grinning like a fool. When Thomas was 2, Katherine discovered she was pregnant again, and this time she was prepared for the sickness and the exhaustion. Owen was just as excited as he had been the first time, just as attentive, and when their daughter was born in the dead of winter, with snow falling softly outside the window, Katherine thought her heart might burst with joy. They named her Lily, after Katherine's mother, and she was a tiny, delicate thing with Katherine's dark hair and a temperament as sunny as a summer day. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and work and love. Thomas grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who followed his father everywhere, learning the ways of the ranch with an eagerness that reminded Katherine of herself at that age. Lily was all laughter and mischief, climbing trees and chasing chickens and refusing to wear dresses if she could possibly avoid it. Owen added on to the house, building more bedrooms and a proper dining room, and Katherine started a vegetable garden that became the envy of the valley. They faced challenges, of course. There was the year the drought nearly wiped them out, when they had to sell half the herd just to survive, and Owen worked himself to exhaustion digging a new well. There was the winter Thomas caught scarlet fever and Katherine did not sleep for 4 days straight, sitting by his bedside and praying to a God she was not sure she believed in. There was the day a mountain lion killed one of their calves, and Owen had to track it for 3 days before he could put it down. But they faced those challenges together, leaning on each other, drawing strength from the bond they had forged in that first blizzard and had been strengthening ever since. And the good times far outweighed the bad. There were summer evenings spent on the porch, watching the sun set over the valley while the children played in the yard. There were Christmas mornings with a tree that Owen cut himself and decorations the children made from pine cones and ribbon. There were birthdays and anniversaries and quiet moments stolen in the middle of a busy day, just the two of them still very much in love. When Thomas was 10 and Lily was 8, Katherine gave birth to their third child, another boy they named James. Owen joked that they were building their own ranch crew, and Katherine laughed and agreed, though secretly she hoped James would be their last. She was 36 now, and while she was still strong and healthy, childbirth took more out of her than it once had. James was a happy, easy baby content to watch the world from his father's arms or his mother's hip. He had Owen's dark hair and Katherine's blue eyes, and he smiled at everyone, stranger and family alike. Thomas and Lily adored him, fighting over who got to hold him, and Katherine watched her children together and felt a contentment so deep it was almost frightening. The ranch had become one of the most successful in the valley. They ran nearly 1,000 head of cattle now, had expanded their land through careful purchases and trades, employed 3 ranch hands who lived in the bunkhouse Owen had built. Katherine's uncle, who had once circled like a vulture, had died 5 years ago, his own ranch sold to pay his debts, and Katherine could not help but feel a grim satisfaction that she had proved him wrong. But more than the success of the ranch, more than the money in the bank or the respect they had earned in town, what mattered to Katherine was the family she and Owen had built. On quiet evenings, when the children were in bed and she and Owen sat together on the porch watching the stars, she thought about that day in the blizzard, about how close she had come to dying alone in the snow. And she thought about how Owen had appeared like a miracle, how he had saved her life and then given her so much more than life, given her love and partnership, and a future she had not dared to dream of. "What are you thinking about?" Owen asked one such evening, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against his chest where she could hear the steady beat of his heart. "That day," Katherine said, and she did not need to explain which day. Owen knew. "The day you found me in the blizzard. I was thinking about how different my life would be if you had not been there." Owen was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "I was thinking about that too. About how I was supposed to be in Helena, how I got lost in the storm and ended up here instead. Sometimes I wonder if it really was just luck or if there was some greater purpose at work." "Does it matter?" Katherine asked, tilting her head to look up at him. Owen smiled down at her, that same smile that had captured her heart all those years ago. "No. All that matters is that I am here now, with you, with our family. Everything else is just details." Katherine reached up and pulled his head down, kissing him with all the love and gratitude and passion she felt, and Owen kissed her back with the same intensity, the same devotion he had shown her every day of their marriage. When they finally broke apart, both smiling, Katherine said, "I love you, Owen Xavier. I will love you until the day I die." "And I love you, Katherine Xavier," Owen replied. "Beyond death, beyond time, beyond anything this world can throw at us. You are my life, my heart, my everything." They sat together in the darkness, wrapped in each other's arms, and Katherine thought about the journey that had brought them here. It had started with a blizzard and a desperate attempt to save a calf, and it had led to this, to a life richer and fuller than she ever could have imagined. She thought about her children, asleep in their beds, safe and loved. She thought about the ranch, the land her father had worked so hard to build and that she and Owen were preserving for the next generation. She thought about all the years they had ahead of them, all the challenges they would face and overcome together. And she thought that she was the luckiest woman in Montana, because she had found love in the most unlikely of places, with a man who had appeared out of nowhere and had chosen to stay, to build a life with her, to love her through all the seasons of their lives. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled at the moon. The air smelled of pine and hay and the coming spring, and Katherine breathed it in, committing this moment to memory, this perfect moment of peace and love and contentment. "We should go to bed," Owen said softly. "James will be up at dawn, and you know how he is if we are not there when he wakes." Katherine laughed because it was true. Their youngest was an early riser and demanded immediate attention from his parents. "Just a few more minutes," she said. "I want to sit here with you a little longer." "We have all the time in the world," Owen said, but he made no move to get up, content to sit with her in the darkness, holding her close. And Katherine realized that was the greatest gift he had given her, not saving her life that day in the blizzard, not the children or the successful ranch or the love that had sustained them through the years. The greatest gift was time, all the days and nights they had spent together, all the moments they had shared, and all the years that still stretched ahead of them, full of possibility and promise. The seasons turned as they always did. Thomas grew into a young man who was the image of his father, steady and strong and capable, taking on more and more responsibility on the ranch until he was running half of it himself. Lily surprised everyone by developing a love of books and learning, and at 15 she announced her intention to become a teacher, a goal Katherine and Owen supported wholeheartedly. James, at 7, was already showing signs of the horseman he would become, with a natural gift for training and gentling even the most spirited animals. Katherine was 43 now, her dark hair threaded with silver, fine lines around her eyes from years of squinting into the sun. Owen was 47, his shoulders still broad and strong but his dark hair gone mostly gray. They moved a little slower than they once had, felt the cold a little more keenly in winter, but they were still healthy and active, still working the ranch side by side as they had from the beginning. It was on a cold February afternoon, almost exactly 20 years since that first blizzard, that Katherine found herself out on the range checking on the herd when the sky began to darken with frightening speed. She recognized the signs immediately, the particular quality of the wind, the smell in the air, and her heart began to pound as she urged her mare toward home. But the storm moved faster than she did, and within minutes she was riding blind through a wall of white that was eerily familiar. She found a young cow in distress, bellowing in pain, and when Katherine dismounted to investigate, she found the cow was in labor, struggling to deliver a calf that was positioned wrong, coming breech. For a moment, Katherine was 23 again, alone and terrified in a blizzard, fighting to save a life while her own hung in the balance. But then she remembered that she was not alone anymore, that she had not been alone for 20 years. And even as the thought formed, she heard the sound of hoofbeats, and Owen was there, appearing out of the white just as he had 2 decades ago. "Need some help?" He called over the wind, and Katherine laughed, because some things never changed. "Always," she called back, and then they were working together, just as they had that first day, their movements synchronized from years of partnership. Owen's hands were just as sure, just as gentle, and within minutes the calf was born, alive and healthy, and the cow was licking it clean despite the raging storm around them. Katherine looked at Owen through the snow, and he looked back at her, and they were both smiling because they both understood the poetry of it, the circle that had been completed. 20 years ago, a blizzard had brought them together, had given them the beginning of their story, and now another blizzard had reminded them of where they had started, of how far they had come. They got the cow and calf to shelter, then rode home together through the storm, and when they finally stumbled into the warmth of the house, their children rushed to help them, taking their coats, bringing them hot coffee, fussing over them the way they had once fussed over Thomas and Lily and James. And Katherine stood there in the middle of her warm, crowded kitchen, surrounded by the family she and Owen had created, and she felt such overwhelming gratitude that she had to blink back tears. That night, after the children had gone to bed, she and Owen sat by the fire just as they had so many times before. Owen took her hand, his thumb rubbing over her knuckles in a gesture that had become habit over the years, and he said, "20 years ago today, you changed my life." 20 years ago today, you saved my life, Katherine corrected. "No," Owen said seriously. "You saved mine. I was lost, Katherine, running from everything that mattered. And then I found you in that blizzard, and suddenly I had a reason to stop running, a reason to stay, a reason to become the man I was meant to be. You gave me that. You and this ranch and our children, you gave me a life worth living." Katherine felt tears slip down her cheeks, and she did not bother to wipe them away. "We saved each other," she said. "That is what people who love each other do." Owen pulled her close, and Katherine rested her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat, strong and steady and true. Outside the wind howled and the snow fell, but inside there was only warmth and light and love, and Katherine knew that whatever storms might come in the years ahead, they would face them together, just as they always had. The years continued to unfold in their gentle, inevitable rhythm. Thomas married a rancher's daughter from Fort Benton, a capable young woman named Sarah, and they built a house on the eastern edge of the property, close enough to be helpful but far enough to have their own independence. They gave Katherine and Owen their first grandchild, a girl named Katherine after her grandmother, and Katherine held that baby in her arms and felt the circle turn again, felt the continuation of all they had built. Lily went to teacher's college in Helena, writing home every week with stories of her studies and her new experiences. She came home every summer and taught the children of the valley, and Katherine was so proud of her she could barely contain it. When Lily was 23, the same age Katherine had been when she met Owen, she married a teacher from Helena named Robert, and they settled in town, visiting the ranch often and bringing their own children in time. James took over more and more of the ranch operations, as Owen's joints began to ache with arthritis, and Katherine's energy began to flag. He was a natural rancher, with his father's gift with animals and his mother's head for business, and Katherine knew the land would be in good hands when she and Owen were gone. But that day still seemed far off. Katherine was 60 now, her hair completely silver, her hands gnarled from a lifetime of hard work. Owen was 64, moving slower than he once had, taking afternoon naps that would have been unthinkable in his younger days. But they were still together, still in love, still stealing kisses in the barn and holding hands on the porch as they watched the sun set. On their 40th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a party at the ranch, and half the valley turned out to celebrate. There was music and dancing and speeches that made Katherine cry and laugh in equal measure. Owen danced with her under the stars, just as he had on their wedding night, and Katherine rested her head on his chest and thought about all the years they had shared, all the joys and sorrows, all the ordinary days that had accumulated into a life. "I would do it all again," Owen whispered in her ear. Every moment, every hardship, every joy, I would do it all again just to have this life with you." "So would I," Katherine whispered back. "1,000 times over I would choose you." They danced until their children gently suggested they should sit down and rest. And then they sat together surrounded by their family, their grandchildren climbing on their laps, and Katherine felt a peace so profound it was almost holy. The winter of their 42nd year together was mild, with little snow and temperatures that rarely dropped below freezing. It was a blessing, people said, a gift after the hard winter the year before. But Katherine felt a strange unease, as if the mild weather was the calm before some storm she could not yet see. The storm came in March, and it was not weather but illness. Owen caught a cough that would not go away, and when Katherine finally convinced him to see the doctor in town, they learned that he had pneumonia, the same illness that had taken Katherine's father all those years ago. The doctor gave them medicine, told Owen to rest, assured them he would be fine, but Katherine saw the worry in his eyes and felt fear grip her heart. She nursed Owen the way he had nursed her through 3 pregnancies and countless minor illnesses over the years. She sat by his bedside, held his hand, brought him soup he could barely eat and medicine he forced down for her sake. Their children came, bringing their own children, filling the house with worried faces and whispered conversations. Owen fought the illness with the same stubborn determination he brought to everything in his life. For 3 weeks, he hovered between improvement and relapse, and Katherine barely left his side, sleeping in the chair beside the bed, waking at his slightest movement. She talked to him constantly, reminiscing about their years together, reminding him of all the reasons he had to fight to stay with her. "Remember that first day?" she said one night, holding his hand between both of hers. "Remember the blizzard and the calf, and how you appeared like an answer to my prayers. You cannot leave me now, Owen Xavier. You promised me forever, and forever is not over yet." Owen opened his eyes, gray eyes that had dimmed with illness but still held the same love they had always held. "Katherine," he whispered, his voice rough and broken. "My Katherine, I am so tired." "I know," Katherine said, tears streaming down her face, "but you have to keep fighting. I cannot lose you. I do not know how to be in this world without you." "You are the strongest person I have ever known," Owen said, each word an effort. "You were surviving before I came, and you will survive after I am gone." "That is not surviving," Katherine said fiercely. "That is just existing. Owen, please, please do not leave me." Owen reached up with the hand she was not holding, touching her face with fingers that trembled. "I have loved you since the moment I saw you," he said. "I will love you beyond death, beyond time, beyond anything this world can hold. If there is a heaven, Katherine, I will be waiting for you there. And if there is not, then loving you was heaven enough for a lifetime." Katherine sobbed, pressing her face against his hand, and she felt his fingers stroke her hair one last time. "I love you," he whispered, "always, forever." "I love you too," Katherine said, but she did not know if he heard her because his eyes had closed and his breathing had become labored. And an hour later, with the dawn breaking over the mountains and his family gathered around his bed, Owen Xavier took his last breath and slipped away. Katherine sat there for a long time, holding his hand, unable to accept that he was gone. This man who had been her partner, her lover, her best friend for 42 years, who had given her a life beyond anything she had dared to dream, who had loved her with a constancy and devotion that had never wavered, was gone. And Katherine felt as if half of herself had been torn away, leaving a wound that would never heal. They buried him on the hill next to her father, overlooking the ranch they had built together. The entire valley came to the funeral, and the preacher spoke of a life well lived, of a man who had been respected and loved. Katherine stood dry-eyed through the service, her children on either side of her, holding her up when her legs threatened to give way. She did not cry, could not cry, felt frozen in a grief so enormous she could not comprehend it. That night, alone in the bed she had shared with Owen for 42 years, Katherine finally wept. She cried for the future they would not have, for the grandchildren he would not see grow up, for all the sunsets they would not watch together. She cried until she had no tears left, until she was empty and exhausted, and then she lay there in the darkness and wondered how she was supposed to go on. The days that followed were a blur. Her children wanted her to come stay with them, afraid to leave her alone, but Katherine refused. This was her home, the home she had shared with Owen, and she would not abandon it. Slowly, painfully, she began to rebuild her life around the absence of the man who had been its center. She rose each morning and did the work that needed doing, checking on the cattle, managing the ranch hands, keeping the books. She cooked meals she barely ate, cleaned a house that seemed too big and too empty, tended her garden because the plants did not care that her heart was broken. And every evening she walked up the hill to Owen's grave and talked to him, telling him about her day, about the children and grandchildren, about how much she missed him. Spring turned to summer, and summer to fall. The ranch continued to run smoothly under James's management, and Katherine was grateful that she did not have to worry about losing the land on top of losing her husband. Her grandchildren visited often, their laughter filling the house with life, and Katherine found comfort in their presence, in the proof that she and Owen's love had created something that would outlast them both. On what would have been their 43rd anniversary, Katherine woke before dawn and rode out to the ravine where Owen had found her all those years ago. It had been decades since she had been here, and the place looked different, smaller somehow, but she remembered every detail of that day. She sat down in the spot where the heifer had labored, where she had been on the verge of giving up, and she let herself remember the young woman she had been, frightened and alone and fighting for survival. That woman felt like a stranger now. Katherine had lived so much life since then, had experienced so much joy and love and purpose, and all of it because of Owen. She thought about what he had said, that she had saved him, but she knew the truth. They had saved each other, two lonely people who had found each other in a storm and had built something beautiful from that chance encounter. "Thank you," she said aloud, though whether she was talking to Owen or to God or to fate itself she could not say. "Thank you for giving him to me, even if it was only for a little while. Thank you for every day, every moment, every memory. I will carry them with me until we meet again." The sun rose over the mountains, painting the valley in shades of gold and pink, and Katherine felt a warmth spread through her chest. It was not the warmth of Owen's arms around her, but it was something, a whisper of comfort, a promise that she would survive this grief just as she had survived everything else life had thrown at her. Katherine lived for another 15 years, long enough to see all of her grandchildren grown, long enough to hold 2 great-grandchildren in her arms. She remained active and engaged, serving on the school board in Fort Benton, helping to establish a lending library, offering advice to young ranchers who were just starting out. She never remarried, never even considered it, because there was only one Owen Xavier, and she had been blessed enough to have him for 42 years. When she finally died at the age of 75, peacefully in her sleep on a warm summer night, her children buried her on the hill next to Owen, just as she had requested. They carved a headstone that read simply, "Katherine Xavier, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother, together again with her Owen." The ranch stayed in the family for generations, passed down from James to his children to their children, and with it passed the story of how it had all begun, of a young woman trying to save a calf in a blizzard and the cowboy who had appeared out of the storm to help her. It became a family legend, told and retold around dinner tables and at holiday gatherings, the story of how Katherine and Owen had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances and had built a love that lasted a lifetime and beyond. And sometimes, on cold winter nights when the wind howled down from the mountains and snow swirled through the valley, people claimed they could see two figures on the hill, standing together by the graves, looking out over the ranch they had built with love and sweat and determination. They were just stories, of course, the kind of romantic tales people liked to tell. But those who saw the figures swore they were real, swore they could see the way the man's arm curved around the woman's shoulders, the way her head rested against his chest, the way they stood together as they always had, partners in life and in death, their love a light that even death could not extinguish.